Hello and welcome to IAMC TV Radio. We'll be exploring the top news headlines today, January 7th. And first up, a powerful 6.8 magnitude earthquake has struck Tibet, near Mount Everest. At least 53 people have been killed, and 62 injured.
Yeah, this region is very prone to earthquakes, because of the shifting tectonic plates. And getting so close to Mount Everest, well, it just complicates things even more. It's a popular spot for climbers and trekkers, and the terrain makes rescue efforts really difficult.
It's hard to imagine the scale of the devastation.
Yeah.
And the logistics of getting aid to such a remote area. Okay. In other news, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar has criticized the Nigerian government for detaining public commentator Shehu Mahdi.
Mahdi was arrested because he refused to remove videos, claiming that President Tinubu allowed a French military base in northern Nigeria. Atiku thinks this is part of a larger trend of silencing dissent, which raises some serious concerns about freedom of speech and the shrinking space for political opposition in the country.
Yeah, definitely a situation that warrants attention. The implications for political discourse in Nigeria could be significant. All right, turning to the economic front. African startups raised $2.2 billion in 2024. That's a 25% drop from the previous year. But I think before we jump into conclusions, there were some positive developments as well.
Absolutely. While there was an overall decline, 188 ventures still managed to secure funding of $1 million or more. And the second half of the year actually saw a strong rebound, driven by mega deals from companies like MoneyPoint and Time Group, which both achieved unicorn status. Just to clarify, a mega deal is a really big investment, typically over $100 million. And a unicorn is a privately held startup valued at over $1 billion.
That's really helpful context. It seems like while there's been a shift in the investment landscape, there's still significant potential and confidence in the African startup ecosystem. Okay, shifting gears a bit to global health. Nigeria started screening passengers at airports for the human metapneumovirus, HMPV, after outbreaks in China spread to other countries.
Right. The virus has hospitalized over 5,000 people in the United Kingdom already, so that's why these screening procedures are being put in place. It's important to note, though, that the rumors about the World Health Organization declaring HMPV a global emergency aren't true.
It's so important to get information from reliable sources, especially with health concerns. In other news from Nigeria, President Tinubu has approved generous retirement packages for army chiefs and generals.
These packages include things like bulletproof SUVs, a $20,000 allowance for medical treatment abroad, personal cooks, and other benefits. And this has drawn some criticism from medical associations, who believe that these resources should be used to improve healthcare within Nigeria.
It's a controversial move, for sure. Raises some questions about priorities and how public funds are being used. Meanwhile, the U.S. government has made some serious accusations against Russia. They're saying that Russia is funding both sides of the ongoing war in Sudan.
This allegation was made by the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. She's suggesting that Russia is fueling the conflict. To advance their own interests, Russia, of course, denies these claims, but it just adds another layer of complexity to an already unstable situation.
Yeah, it's a reminder of how interconnected global events are, and how conflicts can have these ripple effects on international relations. Some concerning news from the U.S. now. The country has recorded its first death from the H5N1 bird flu.
The person who died was a Louisiana resident, over 65, with some underlying health conditions, and they had been in contact with infected birds. Authorities don't believe there's evidence of human-to-human transmission yet, but they're still urging caution. What's worrying experts is how fast this virus can mutate, and its potential to cause a pandemic.
Definitely unsettling. It sounds like a situation that needs to be closely watched.
Yeah.
And finally, in a move that might surprise some people, President Biden has secretly transferred 11 prisoners linked to al-Qaeda from Guantanamo Bay to Oman.
2 of these prisoners were actually Osama bin Laden's former bodyguards. This transfer is part of the Biden administration's plan to reduce the number of detainees at Guantanamo.
This raises questions about the future of Guantanamo Bay for sure, and the ongoing challenges of balancing national security with human rights. We covered a lot today, but there's always more to explore and understand.
Yeah, it's a really complicated issue with so many legal and ethical considerations.
Absolutely. We'll have to see how things develop and what impact it has on U.S. detention policies. Now let's dig a little deeper into some of these stories, starting with the earthquake in Tibet. What are the immediate priorities after such a devastating event?
Well, in the first few days after an earthquake like this, the focus is really on search and rescue, finding survivors trapped under the rubble, getting medical aid to the injured, and making sure everyone is safe. The mountainous terrain makes it really tough for rescue workers and aid groups to reach those remote areas.
And then there's the long process of rebuilding.
Exactly. It's a huge task to reconstruct everything, provide shelter for those who have lost their homes, and support their livelihoods. It requires a coordinated effort from government agencies, international aid organizations, and the local community.
It's hard to comprehend the scale of the rebuilding effort and the resilience people need to overcome something like this. Now let's shift our attention to the detention of Shehu Mahdi in Nigeria. What are the potential consequences of this case for freedom of speech and political dissent in the country?
Well, this case has sparked a real debate about where the limits of free speech lie, especially when it comes to criticizing the government. Some people argue that Mahdi's arrest is a clear violation of his right to express his views, while others say that his allegations could incite violence and threaten national security. The outcome of this case could set a precedent for how the government handles dissent in the future.
So it's a situation with potentially far-reaching consequences for political discourse and the balance between free expression and government control. Now for a more positive topic. Even though funding for African startups dipped in 2024, some companies still managed to do well. What factors contributed to their success in such a tough economic environment?
A few things played a role. First, some startups were able to adapt by shifting their focus to essential services or finding new market opportunities. Second, certain sectors like fintech and e-commerce continue to attract investment because of their growth potential. And third, government initiatives and support programs help some startups survive the economic downturn.
So it seems like a combination of innovation, adaptability, and strategic partnerships were crucial for navigating the changing investment landscape. Okay, let's talk about the HMPV outbreak. This virus is now spreading to different countries. What do people need to know about it, and how can they protect themselves?
HMPV is a respiratory virus that can cause a range of symptoms, from mild cold-like symptoms to more serious cases of pneumonia. It spreads through respiratory droplets when an infected person coughs or sneezes, and also through close contact.
So the same precautions we take to prevent the flu would apply here.
Exactly. Frequent hand washing, covering your mouth and nose when coughing or sneezing, and avoiding close contact with sick people are all important preventative measures. Right now, there's no specific treatment or vaccine for HMPV, but supportive care, like getting plenty of rest, staying hydrated, and using over-the-counter medications can help manage symptoms.
And of course, if someone has severe symptoms, they should see a doctor. Let's discuss President Tinubu's decision to approve those generous retirement packages for Nigerian army chiefs and generals. What are the arguments for and against such lavish benefit?
Well, those who support the packages say they're necessary to attract and keep qualified people in the military. They also see them as a way to recognize and reward the sacrifices of high-ranking officers who have served the nation for many years.
And what about the other side of the argument?
Critics of these packages say they're just too much and put an unnecessary burden on taxpayers. They think the money would be better spent on improving essential services in Nigeria, like healthcare, education, and infrastructure.
It's a tough issue. It highlights the challenge of balancing recognition for service with responsible use of public funds. Moving on to the U.S. accusations against Russia in the Sudan war, what evidence has been presented to support these claims? And what could be the consequences of Russia's involvement?
While the U.S. hasn't publicly released specific evidence, they're pointing to Russia's close ties with both sides of the conflict in Sudan, the Sudanese armed forces, and the Rapid Support Forces. They're also alleging that Russia has been involved in illegal activities in the region, like gold trading and arms deals. If these accusations are true, it could lead to more sanctions against Russia and potentially increase tensions between the two countries.
So this situation could have a significant impact on international relations and make the conflict in Sudan even more complicated. Now let's address the first U.S. death from the H5N1 bird flu. What does this case tell us about the potential danger of this virus and what's being done to prevent it from spreading further?
This death is a stark reminder of how serious the H5N1 bird flu is and the possibility of it spreading from birds to humans. Even though there's no evidence of sustained human-to-human transmission right now, the virus's ability to mutate is a big concern for health experts.
So the threat of a pandemic is a real worry.
It is, and health officials are monitoring the situation closely. They're urging people to take precautions, like avoiding contact with sick or dead birds, and practicing good hygiene. Scientists are also working on developing vaccines and antiviral treatments to fight the virus.
Hopefully those efforts will be successful in reducing the risk. Finally, let's talk about the transfer of those 11 al-Qaeda-linked prisoners from Guantanamo Bay to Oman. What were the reasons behind this move? And what challenges does it present?
The Biden administration has made it a priority to reduce the number of detainees at Guantanamo. As part of their effort to eventually close the facility, they believe that Guantanamo has become a symbol of America's controversial detention policies after 9/11, and that it's hurting the country's image and values.
But closing Guantanamo was no easy task.
No, it's not. One of the biggest challenges is finding countries willing to accept these detainees. Many countries are hesitant because of security concerns and potential political backlash.
And there's the ethical question of making sure these individuals don't pose a threat once they're released.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act between national security and human rights.
This situation requires careful thought and really highlights the lasting impact of the war on terror. As you can see, we've covered a wide range of topics today, from natural disasters to political conflicts, global health concerns, and ethical dilemmas.
And we've only scratched the surface. There's always more to learn about the world we live in.
I hope this discussion has given you a deeper understanding of some of the most important issues we face today. And most importantly, I hope it's made you curious to learn more.
Staying informed and having these conversations is crucial for creating a more just and equitable world.
It's true, knowledge is power, and we have to use it responsibly. Before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've talked about so many different things today. The earthquake in Tibet, the arrest of Sheikh Mahdi in Nigeria, the HMPV outbreak, the retirement packages for Nigerian military leaders, the U.S. accusations against Russia, the first U.S. death from the H5N1 bird flu, and the transfer of prisoners from Guantanamo Bay. All these events seem separate, but they're all connected in this complex web of global affairs. And what ties them all together is the human element, the people whose lives are affected by these events, the decisions made by those in power, and the consequences for individuals and communities around the world. So I want to encourage you to look beyond the headlines and think about the human stories behind these events, to try and understand the experiences of those who are often marginalized or forgotten, and to remember that even with all the divisions we see, we're all connected by our shared humanity.
That's a really important point, and something we should all keep in mind.
It's our compassion, our empathy, and our willingness to understand each other that will help us create a more just and equitable world.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our discussion of today's top news headlines.
Yes, it has been a fascinating and thought-provoking look at the events shaping our world.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope you've gained some valuable insights.
Remember to stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed. Thank you for listening to the Today's Top News Headlines on IAMC TV Radio.